Please be seated. Well, thank you for coming out on a cold, rainy, late winter night to mark the beginning of Lent on Ash Wednesday. I think maybe this commitment to coming out in weather like this is part of the core of our community. And community is the theme for this Lent at St. Margaret's, talking about our community. And we talked about what the core of our community is. And maybe it is this sense of communal worship, coming together against all odds, even if we're tired and yawning, if we've just come back from work, we've had a really, really long day, and it's only Wednesday, and yet we still find the energy and the need to come gather in a church and worship and mark this day. And we ask ourselves, what is the nature of our community, a church community that's different from other communities? Because if you just pause and think about all the different communities of which you are a part, there are many. The first one that you really don't choose is your family. You're born into it. But then as you go on, you might go to school and you maybe choose the friends that you want to hang out with, and you've got a community of close friends. And then when you go on, if you go on to college or a trade, you have people that you might study with or you might work with. Then there are people that you might live with in your neighborhood that maybe form a community. And then if you are lucky enough to have kids, maybe there are activities your kids are involved in and you get to know the other parents in those activities. Or maybe there are things that you do on your own. Maybe you're a dancer and you dance with people every Saturday night, contra dancing or what have you, and that's your community. You're involved in so many communities, and each of those communities gives you something. You give that community something, but then that community offers you something in return, whether it's a sense of camaraderie, a sense of togetherness. Something is of value that's given to you in those things. I remember there was a story recently of a couple whose child was swimming, and they were in a swim club, and it was one of those grinds, and Jim, you know how this goes. You're going to swim meets every weekend in far-flung places like Frederick and Pennsylvania and God knows where. And you're driving these kids to these swim meets, and you spend all of your weekends for 4 or 5 years in a row with these other parents, and you form bonds with these parents, and you know couples who are getting divorced, and you know couples who are going through very trying times, and you celebrate birthdays and anniversaries, and you mourn the losses and the pains of life. Well, there was this one couple whose child had leukemia and died. And they realized that the most supportive community in their life was not their family, it wasn't their neighborhood association, it wasn't the people that they worked with, but rather it was this group of other swim parents that rallied around them and nurtured them because they had gone through so much together. And I wonder what that sense of community can teach us here at St. Margaret's. One of my favorite authors, Wendell Berry, just came out with another collection of stories called A Place in Time. And in it, one of these stories, one of the protagonists talks about the sense of membership in a community and what that feels like. This guy's name is Burley Coulter, and he reflects that this association, this community, was a mere gathering, not held together by power or organization like the army, but by kinship, friendship, history, memory, kindness, and affection, who were apt to be working together in various combinations according to need and even always according to pleasure. I think it's a great description of the church. I think it's a great description of the church because we're not in a society, in a situation where if you live 2 doors down from St. Margaret's Church, you have to come here. This is the church that you must belong to. I mean, we draw people from Millersville, from Graysonville, from that bridge over to this bridge. We draw people from all over because they want to be here. There's a sense of a desire to say, I want to be a member in this community. And tonight we mark, to some degree, a membership. Maybe not a membership in the community of St. Margaret's, but something far bigger and something far greater than that. You're going to walk down this aisle, and Stuart or myself is going to smudge your forehead in the shape of a cross with ashes. We're going to dip our thumb in this little bowl full of ashes and make what hopefully will look like a cross on your forehead. And that's, to some degree, an entrance. To some degree, it's an initiation into a community. Again, far bigger than the community you see gathered around you here tonight. It's a community that's bigger than any of us, this community of Christ. And it's a community of death, but it's also a community of new life. Because the symbol that we give you with ashes happens to be the same symbol that I just used 3 days ago on 4 little infants in baptism. I dip my thumb into a little bowl of oil that's been blessed by a bishop, we call it chrism, and I mark the seal of Christ in the form of a cross on the forehead of a little infant. And it gets repeated yearly in the form of ashes. What does this tell us about the nature of our community? To the outside observer, it might say, well, you're cyclical. You understand that life and death is a cycle, and it comes and it goes, and you're marking that. But also, I think it says that we take community seriously, and we do these things in public. We do them as part of communal worship, not as separate things that we do in private. Because doing it in public means so much more. There's a wonderful article in the Washington Post yesterday about a man named Carlos Gutierrez, who is a Cuban immigrant, who's also the former Secretary of Commerce. And as a Cuban immigrant, he became a naturalized citizen some years ago. And a judge in Brooklyn told him, once he became a naturalized citizen, he said, look, you have as much right as a citizen in the United States as anyone else. He said, as a matter of fact, you might have more of a right to call yourself a citizen because you chose to be here. You may not have chosen to be baptized. You may not have chosen to be cradled in someone's arms and sealed and marked as Christ's own forever, but you are choosing to be here tonight. You are choosing to make a symbolic mark of your mortal nature in a community, and that means something. And I always wonder, why do we choose this? Why do we choose to do this in a community? Why do we choose to do the things that we do in this community? Because living in community means being vulnerable. It means opening yourself up to being loved, which for a lot of us is not easy. Because it means risking. It means risking people knowing who you really are. And I tell the story of a guy in Rhode Island who, we missed him from church for a while, and I said, hey, where you been? He said, well, I've been going through a really hard time. I really didn't want to come to church and bother anyone with it. I said, man, if you can't bother anyone in church with your hard times, I don't know what we're here for. But it was that facade that he wanted to put up to say, I'm all right. I don't need anything. I'm okay. What would it look like if all of us just broke down in tears every Sunday? It might actually look real, right? Being vulnerable is a part of living in community. Another part of living in community is being in conflict. There's no church that doesn't know conflict. There's never been a pew in this church where 2 people who aren't diametrically opposed about something aren't sitting next to each other. That's a wonderful thing. It's a great thing not to get along with people. Because Jesus said, you have to love your neighbor. You have to love your enemy. You don't have to like them, but you have to love them. There's a distinction there. All right? It means that we sit shoulder to shoulder with people that we might not agree with, but we also realize that God is just as present in them as God is in us. And that takes growth. It's a challenge to live in community. It's not easy. I think if it were easier to be in a Christian community like ours, we'd probably have more people. But because we take it seriously, because we take life and death and sin and penitence and community and vulnerability seriously, it's hard to be in community. It's hard to get here in the dark, cold rain. It's hard to come up and hear those words, "You are dust, and to dust you shall return." It reminds us of things we might rather not think about. But we do it anyway, because we are a community. Because we are a community based on something bigger than ourselves. We are a community based on something greater than our own dreams or desires. We are a community based on love, a community designed to give and also receive support. We're a community that's focused not only on the cross, but also beyond the cross, to the resurrected glory of Christ, which shines in all of us. May this community ever be so. Amen.